Okay, so we said that this is all triangles now for this section, so you may have needed the perimeter formula, the area formula, or the Pythagorean theorem formula. So for number 10, first of all, did anybody get a chance to do the triangles?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect. I hear a lot of yeses. So I'm just going to ask you, what answer do you have for number 10?
8.
That is correct. So does anybody have a challenge or a question about number 10? I'm going to say that's a no. This one was pretty straightforward, that you needed the area formula. So if everybody got H, then we're good to go with that one. Now, number 11, it says, consider this triangle. What is the perimeter of the triangle? So what did you get for this one?
C.
I'm in between. I put D, but before I put C.
You
So
said before you put C? C is correct.
Okay, okay.
But let's see. So does anybody have a question with that one? Because I think I heard other answers.
Yeah, I must have missed a step because I got D.
Okay, let me see. The little sheet of paper. All right, so for this one, if you're still looking at it, let me see if I can draw one.
Yeah.
So we're gonna say that's a right triangle. And we have 8 and 15. So because the perimeter formula is actually the 3 sides,
Yeah. I got it.
you don't know the third side, so you have to use the Pythagorean theorem. So now there's multiple ways to do this. Sometimes if you know you're looking for C, you're gonna have the A squared So what you're trying to figure out is what is the other side of the triangle so that you can just add the 3 up. So you have to understand with this problem that you need ultimately the perimeter, but you're missing the C length in order to add up the perimeter. So here you're saying you know that 1 is 8, 1 is 15, and you don't know the other one. So now you're saying 8 times 8.
64.
And then the 15 times 15.
225.
15.
So now you're just adding up. What's 225 and 64?
289.
So 17.
So you have to say to yourself that the 289 is still C squared. So this is where you take the square root of 289.
Yes.
17.
And you have 17. So now what you're going to do is say the answer is 8 plus 15 plus 17.
Wait, I have a question. Okay, that's the square root part is the most confusing part for me. So how did you get 17?
Let me see. So can you still see the screen?
Yeah.
Or is it still the whiteboard?
I can see the white.
So can you see the calculator or no?
No.
I have a calculator.
Let me just switch. So this is why I have to keep switching the screen that I'm on. So now you can see the calculator?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so the squaring and the square root are complements of each other. So let me use the other calculator.
How I do the square? Since I have a little problem with that, I just go 15 times 15 and then 16 times 16 and then until 17 times 17 until I got the that I'm looking for.
And you can do that. Yeah, that's perfectly fine to do that. And then like we said, if you know the multiplication table, you might know some in your head, like 8 times 8 is 64. You don't even have to use the squaring key. The challenge though is in reverse. You're going to also have to say, when you see a 64, you understand that the square root of that is 8.
8.
When you see a 25, you understand that the square root of that is 5. And like we said, when we were doing absolute value, truthfully, the answer could be an 8 or a negative 8 to get 64, or a 5 or a negative 5 to get 25. So you have to be mindful of that too, because the two negatives make a positive. Now, if you get a bigger number that you don't know, like the 289, what you're doing is these are the two keys that are complementary. So if I say the 5 and I press the squaring key, I am going to get 25, right? So these are ones that we already know because they're on the multiplication table. But if I'm going to do the square root, I'm pushing that, excuse me, I'm pushing that button first because I want to put the 289 underneath of the symbol. Now when I hit equals, the answer is 17. That means that 17 times 17 is 289. So that last step you have to remember because you're saying that C squared is 289. But what you actually need to add up for the perimeter is just what is C before you started squaring. And that's the square root key that you're looking for on your scientific calculator. On the other calculator that I had for Google, it was just still looking like the check mark.
So I have a question. Is square root like
one.
division or is it completely different?
No, it's division,
Okay.
but it's like imperfect squares. So you can say,
Okay.
you know, because you know the multiplication, like 2 times 2 is 4, 3 times 3 is 9, you know, 4 times 4 is 16. When you do the reverse, it is a style of dividing because that's what we said. That's all you can do in math. All you can do is the 4 operations. So you're either adding in some way, like when somebody says perimeter, it's essentially just adding. So everything comes back to add, subtract, multiply, or divide. But there are like these different categories or different orders or different purposes for doing what you're doing. So if you're going to be squaring and finding the square root, I would say definitely use the calculator because some of them you're going to memorize in the lower numbers, but then some of them, it's going to be much easier to just type in 289 and the square root key. Now, what you can say to yourself is you can guess, of course. Now we're back to like what we were saying yesterday, you're making an educated guess. That say you already knew 15 times 15 is 225, and now, excuse me, you get an answer like 289, you know it's got to be close to the number 15, right? So if you did the 15 times 15 is 225, and now you still have a number in the 200s, a good guess would be you're not going to have, it's not 23, it's not A, and it's not D. Now, what might be a challenge is picking between B and C. Excuse me. This is where you need like an exact number, like 17, to add up to 40.
Okay.
So I would say like a lot of these with the triangle, and you know you're going to use the Pythagorean theorem, you need to use the calculator.
All right. I start doing the problem all the way until 17. I got it right, but then I don't see any 17s here. So
Right.
what I did was then I just did 15 times 8 is 120 divided by 3, and then I got 40.
Yeah, that is.
But that's why, because I was missing one step. So that's why I was going into because if I divide it by 2, it's 60. So that's why I left it like that.
Yeah, and that's the thing. When you do a multiple choice test, the people who are designing the test assume that you're going to try to do the operations with the numbers that they gave you. This is why you want to make sure you really understand the question, because you are going to be able to manipulate the numbers and get like 23, 60, 40, 38. That's why they pick those numbers. They're not always picking random numbers and then one right number. They are picking numbers that would be a mistake. So now this is why we're saying the beginning is, it says, consider this triangle. So the beginning part was this, like, just what is the triangle? So automatically you should say to yourself, I'm looking at a right triangle. I might need the Pythagorean theorem, right?
Okay,
That's what they mean when they say consider. You're just like, okay, it's a triangle. Now what kind of triangle? It's a right triangle. Now what else? One of the sides is not labeled. I might need the Pythagorean theorem. So now this is just you, again, trying to read yourself and ask yourself questions. Then after you considered it, the question is actually underneath of your consideration. So now it's saying, what is the perimeter? That's really this part over here. Perimeter means I should add up all of the sides. So now after you considered it, you already considered that one of the sides was not labeled. That's why you have the question mark, right? Here. So what you're saying is, you're first saying one of the sides is not labeled. The question that they're asking me is to add up all of the sides. I don't know the third side, so how could I add it up? And then last is where you do the Pythagorean theorem. So like for what you're saying, Zoila, you got the number 17, you have to already be thinking you need to put the number 17 where there's no number so that you can add up 3 sides. Because if you're not thinking that, you could do something else with the number 17. Or you can do something else with the 8 and the 15. So you really have to say to yourself, you could do a lot of things with these numbers and they can mean a lot of things, but you want to make sure that your mind is going where the question is before you just manipulate the numbers. So like we said before about the one with the, like, just travel, right? It didn't tell you a 4th number, but by the words you're saying, you're returning back to where you started. So sometimes when you're doing a math problem, it's not all, I'm not even gonna say sometimes, most of the time, it's not only about doing the numbers and doing the arithmetic. Even one like this is, it's problem solving is really what they're testing you on. Because what they're saying is, do you recognize somebody's asking you for the perimeter, but you don't even have all 3 sides of the triangle? That's really what it is that can somebody ask you a question and you say, I don't have all the information, let me go get the rest of the information and then I will answer your question. And right after that is the test taking tip. So this is what you have to be mindful of, is that you're doing the math tests, but they're using math to test you on other things. So this one is saying, if you are asked to find a missing side length of a polygon based on its area or perimeter, first write out the formula for the area or perimeter of that polygon. So now this whole section is polygon. So that's, poly just means more than one. So that's square, triangle, rectangle, parallelogram, trapezoid, whatever it could be. What they're saying is always start with the formula for it, like we did. Then substitute the information you have and solve for the missing side length. So in a case like a triangle, you only have 2 sides, but they're asking you for the perimeter. What's missing is the 3rd side. The same thing can happen with the one about travel that was a rectangle. They gave you 3 directions, but to complete the rectangle, you're really understanding that the rule is I should double the side that they gave me. So what you're doing is you're starting with the formula that says A plus B plus C plus D. Now, some people, because I think someone was on yesterday, I think she's not here today, Josette was like, hey, I only added up the 3 numbers that was in the problem. that makes perfect sense, right? Until you realize you're talking about a rectangle and you have to put the fourth direction in there yourself. So if you, even though the numbers are important, the rule for doing the, let me see if I can bring this one up. If you remember that little piece of paper we did, so that was like the word cube strategy. So this is what they tell you, you know, when you're first doing word problems. You're going to read the word problem, circle the numbers, but do not do anything with the numbers. And now they're saying underline the question for the U. So after you read the whole thing, it's good to read the question a second time. Then you're boxing some keywords. So like a keyword would have been perimeter, which is letting you know to add again. That's telling you what operation to use. Way down at E is when you're really going to use the adding, subtracting, multiplying, or dividing. So when they say evaluate, that is solving the answer or solving the problem, finding the answer. But you can't do it until you notice everything, like the numbers that are in the problem. You focus on the question, you pay attention to the keywords, then you evaluate. After you evaluate, you see if it makes sense. So like the number 17 does make sense for the longest side of a triangle, if one side was 8 and one side is 15, and then saying, okay, now I have 3 numbers and I can add, that does make sense. So you want to go through these steps if you get a straight word problem, especially one that seems like it might be 2 steps or seems like it might be storytelling in some way. So number 12 is just like that. You're noticing again, when they say consider this triangle, what are you noticing is that one of the sides is missing, right? That's what I would notice. This is why we're even doing that, the charts on New York Times blog, is because what we're saying is for all of your tests, you have to be really focused on what you're actually looking at, not what you want to be looking at, not what you were looking at in the last problem. It's like wine tasting or something. You have to like clear your palate and take a look at what you're doing in this particular problem. So for this one, you're missing the bottom, which I would call the B. You're missing the base of the triangle. So this is asking you what is the area, but you don't have the base. So similar to number 11, where you needed to use the Pythagorean theorem and the perimeter formula, in number 12, you need to use the Pythagorean theorem and the area formula. So who has the answer for number 12?
I got 2 answers. The first 12. Is it 12?
I got 30.
I got
Yes.
21.
32.5?
No, 30 is the right answer for what you're going to put on the grid. The answer is 30. But 12 is the right answer, Gladys, for the side length of the triangle. So how many people got 12 as the answer for B for the triangle?
Yes, I did.
So who did not get 12 might be a better question. So let's take a look at that one. So it looks like, so Gladys, that means that you got that part right, that the side length is 12. So you're not really getting like 2 answers. What you're doing is you're going step by step to solve the problem. So for this one, you've got the right triangle. This time you have 5, 13. So what you automatically know is that B should be less than 13, right? Because what we said is that that C length is always the longest side of the triangle. So now here you are, same thing. You're gonna say 5 squared plus B squared equals 13 squared. So when you did this one, you got 25. And then the 13 times 13. So this ends up just being your regular algebra that you should subtract 25.
Whoa.
So now you have 144. But this one you probably already know because it's on the multiplication table. What times what is 144?
12.
So you got the 12. So now you have to focus again on what is the question. So the question says, what is the area? So now you're looking at the area formula. One half the base times the height. So when you take the 12 and put it as the base, now you're saying the area is 1/2 of 12 times 5. Now, what we said is you're looking at this, you could do it in multiple ways. You could just say, I already know 12 times 5 is 60. And I can take half of that and get 30. Or I can say half of 12 is 6. So when I say 1/2 of 12 is 6, then I can say 6 times 5 is 30. So it doesn't matter if you want to do like these two first and say half of 60, or take half of the first number and say you're going to do these two first and get 6. But either way, once you do 1/2 of the base times the height, you should have 30 as the answer. So the process for number 12 is use the Pythagorean theorem to find the missing side, then find the area.
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
How do you know that? Because when I look at that problem, we have 5 and 13. I'm counting that as A plus B. So how do you know that the 12 is B and not C?
That's a great answer. Let me pull up that other page.
The hypotenuse is C.
I appreciate that vocabulary word. Someone's dusting off hypotenuse. Congratulations. That's the perfect word because I haven't even said it yet today. I really appreciate that. So let me go back to math is fun. You do have to memorize the hypotenuse.
They label it as C.
So when you're looking at the right triangle, even if it's not labeled, the longest side that is diagonal from the 90-degree angle is always C. So that means that when you're over here, what would be the height? I typically just always call that A. And then the bottom, the base, I typically always also just stick with the B. But what we said about the Pythagorean theorem is that it doesn't matter if you switch up the A and the B. So on the Pythagorean theorem page, because this is addition, you could call the B A and the A B if you want to, because you're only going to add them up. The most important thing is that you always know C is the longest side and that is the hypotenuse, because if they do say what is the hypotenuse, you need to know that that is the right vocabulary word.
Okay.
So what I always do, because we also said when we looked at some of the other pages, on this page, they are putting the right triangle like this, with the angle on the left and the base on the bottom, but they could be rotating the triangle, like we said before. When we looked at this, like this one right here, it doesn't have the right triangle in it. And it's asking you, is this even a right triangle? So if you're doing this style, you have to assume that 26 is C, because it's the biggest number, so it's the longest side, and it's diagonal from the corner, which if this is a right triangle, that would be the 90 degrees. So this is one of the reasons why you're just drawing them out, is to make sure that you get the rules of the shape that help you process the question. Okay. So when I look at this in number 12, I'm automatically saying, oh, I have A and C. I'm missing B. That's how I know how to set up my Pythagorean theorem problem, because if this was multiple choice, You might also have other numbers, like say somebody put 13 as B, you're gonna come up with a whole different number. So you have to label the A, the B, and the C of the right triangle. So if you got 12, so like Gladys, you said you got 12, then you must not have done the area correctly. If you didn't get 12, you might not have labeled the A, B, and C correctly, or you might not have been thinking about using the Pythagorean theorem first. But if somebody, if you're looking at the question and you're saying, how do I solve this? The answer is, I'm going to use the Pythagorean theorem to get the base of the triangle. Because the real question is, what is the area? So this is another example where you needed two formulas in a way, you know, but you're still focused on the actual question is about area. So any questions about number 12? Or I should say any other questions? So now we're at number 13. So this is the one where we said you also needed some more vocabulary. It's saying an isosceles triangle has one side 8 inches long and another side 3 inches long. What is the shortest possible perimeter in inches? So what did you pick out for number 13?
19.
That is correct. Bernie's on fire today.
Bernie.
So, now let me pick up the reason why they said to draw this one is because they're telling you that it is an isosceles triangle. So what they're trying to get you to do is draw out something where the two sides are the same. Let me try that one again. So if you have some kind of triangle that looks like that, they gave you one side is 8 inches and one side is 3 inches. So actually, let me try to draw that one better. If you had 8 inches and you had, you know, sides like this for isosceles, that would be one style of triangle. If you had 3, you would not be able to put, oh my goodness. You would not be able to put an 8, right? With isosceles. Some background noise. You wouldn't be able to put an 8 with an isosceles triangle that had two sides that were 3. So this is why they said the hint is to try to draw out possible solutions. But the first thing you need to know is that isosceles means 2 of the sides are the same. So it's either going to be 3, 3, and 8, or 8, 8, and 3. So does that make sense?
Yep. Okay.
Yes.
So this is why you are going to need to use your scrap paper. Because you need to know isosceles as the definition, just like the right triangle, you're going to need to know what you're looking at first or what you're looking for. So, anybody else have a question about that one? So if you're drawing it, that's what you should have came up with is the 8, 8, and 3. So now for number 14. This one is just what is the length in feet of side B? So what did you pick out for number 14?
F.
That is correct. Any questions about that one? So now this one, all you're saying is all I should do is the Pythagorean theorem. When I get the answer for B, I'm done, right? So because this one is still saying the same thing, consider this triangle. You should really do that part that says consider. When you're looking at the triangle, you're saying, I'm missing a side. How am I going to figure out the side length? I'm going to use the Pythagorean theorem. Underneath of that is the question though, that just says, what is the length? So once you get the answer for the Pythagorean theorem, you're done. In one like this, you don't have to do area, you don't have to do perimeter or anything extra. You're just saying, once I get the number 20, that is the length of B.
I didn't hear the answer to the question.
It is F, 20.
Oh. Okay.
Well, this is kind of just along the lines of a one-step problem now.
So how do you come up with 20?
So the same exact way. So first thing is write down the Pythagorean theorem on your paper.
Mm-hmm.
Did you write that down yet?
Writing it now.
Okay.
Let's see. Okay.
So the Pythagorean theorem, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. So now what is a?
15.
So you're just replacing. What is b?
We're looking for it.
Exactly, you're looking
B?
for it, you don't know, so you're leaving it there. What is c?
25.
25. So step one is to say that you need the Pythagorean theorem. Step two is to replace the information that you do know. So you know the A and you know the C. Now step three is to start doing the arithmetic, which would be your 15 times 15, which we already know from a previous problem, was 225. We don't know the B, and now we're doing 25 times 25.
Okay.
So now you're doing a regular algebra problem where you have to put everything on one side. You're trying to isolate the variable again. So basically you're saying B should be by itself, and there's a 225 in the way of that. So you should subtract the 225. So when you're saying B squared equals the 400, now this is where you're saying you want to know what is B by itself. So you should do the square root of 400. So what times itself would give you 400? This one is an easier one too, if you're just thinking about regular division. So if you know that 2 times 2 is 4, 20 times 20 is 400. So when you do that, you're saying B equals 20. So now in other times, we use that information. Like, so in the question number 12, we had to use one of the side lengths in order to find the area. In question number 11, we had to find a side length in order to find the perimeter and add them up. But in this question, they're just asking you, what is the length of B? So once you get 20, that's the answer. Because you're focused on the whole reason that I'm doing the Pythagorean theorem is to get the B length. When I get that, B equals 20, that's the end. That's the answer for me. Because they're not asking me about the perimeter. They're not asking me about the area. They just said, what is the side length?
Okay.
Is that making sense, Jamie?
Yeah. Yes, of course it is.
So now we're on 15. Another thing to consider. They're giving you a lot to consider.
Yep.
So now this one, consider this triangle. Now automatically you're like, okay, these are all different lengths. This is not a right triangle. So now that's eliminating having to use the Pythagorean theorem, right? That's just your considering. You got 2 side lengths out of 3, and this time it's not a right triangle. So it says the perimeter of the triangle is 27. What is the length of A? So what did you write down for this one?
11.
That's perfect. Any questions about that?
Yeah.
So now this
No,
is just, was that a question?
all right. So for me, if you could just work that problem.
Yes. Are you on a laptop or a cell phone?
That's, uh, I'm on my desktop looking at the work.
Okay. Because we can also, I can always, if anybody is on a laptop ever or on a desktop, where you can see the tools for yourself. So let me see, like when I do like this, you see how things pop up?
Wait,
Sometimes
you
for
doing what?
you, can you see on the screen that there's other things on the screen?
Yes.
I'm special. No.
What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna turn it on that I'm gonna turn the next class, I'm gonna turn it on that everybody can share their screen. So if you ever want to use like the whiteboard on your computer, or you want to open up a notepad or something like that, you can show me what you're writing down. So like right now, I'm going to write it down and you're just going to follow along. But if ever you want to share your own screen, you can do that. So if you move the mouse, you'll see some other, options for yourself, like to turn off your sound, turn off the video, things like that. So let me just go to my whiteboard.
Okay.
So you have to go again, when they say the consider, you're saying to yourself, you have a triangle. Let's just say this one is 7, 8, 9. The whole point is that they're not the same length. So this is not an equilateral triangle. This is not the isosceles triangle. This is the scalene triangle. So what we're saying is, in order to do perimeter again, so now this is where you're going by you're boxing out or considering all of the relevant vocabulary. So when it says consider the triangle, you're supposed to recognize a side length is missing. You're also supposed to recognize you can't figure this one out just by doing the Pythagorean theorem, because it's not a right triangle. So what you're saying to yourself, underneath of the triangle, it says the perimeter of the triangle is 27. What is the length of A? So they're setting you up with perimeter and they want to just know one side length. So if you look at the perimeter formula, you're saying perimeter equals A plus B plus C. So this is just where you're memorizing the area formula and the perimeter formula for those primary shapes. So now this time, it's asking you what is A. So that's obviously the letter that you're gonna leave, because that's what the question is. The other information that you can pull out is that the perimeter is 27. B, it doesn't matter which number you pick. C, it doesn't matter which number you pick. But this is the regular basic algebra problem that we're doing. So you're saying you're going to combine the like terms. You should add up the 9 and the 7. So what's 9 plus 7?
16.
And now you have to isolate the A again, because that's really where the question is. So let me get rid of that equal sign. You should subtract 16 from both sides. So if 27 equals A plus 16, you can figure out what the A is by subtracting 16.
Oh, wait, I did that back.
So you should be able to check it and say, does 11 plus 7 plus 9 come back to the 27?
Okay. 16.
So does that make sense, Jamie?
Yeah.
So the key is the vocabulary, because I think you can do the arithmetic. in my opinion. So I think that where you might have a challenge is approaching the problem. So you got to ask yourself a question like, what should I do? Like, just use the cubes idea. Say, what is the information? I see a 9, I see a 7, like really just like pull it apart. Like you're really analyzing. And then the question, oh, perimeter. I know the perimeter formula of a triangle is A plus B plus C. I don't have the A. So what should I do? They told me the perimeter is 27. So another approach to that, even if you weren't using the, if you didn't do it like I did it with algebra, you can just say 27 minus the 9 minus the 7. That has to leave the third side. So there's always more than one way to do it in math, but you do have to understand the vocabulary because that's setting up what they're asking you for. So now if they said the perimeter is 27, now what's the area? You would have to use that and a height length. So without knowing like perimeter, area, what the real question is, you're not going to pick out the right arithmetic to do. So I would say always start with analyzing it. What is the information that you have? And then really, if you have to read the question 3 times, you cannot start doing any arithmetic until you know the question. Don't do it. Because you'll randomly do some arithmetic and be like, oh, it's A. And you're gonna do, it's almost like a setup. They're saying if you just add them, that's A. And but what a student feels is if I come up with what I see, I must be right. But that's how they design these tests. So you don't want to do that. You want to only do the work that would be involved in the question. So now we have what, just one more? No, 2 more.
I thought it was 2 more.
So there's 2 more. So number 16.
17.
Says, this is another one, oops, this is another one, traveling. But we know that we're making a triangle this time. So they're giving you directions. It says a helicopter flying at 120 miles per hour takes off at noon and flies south for 180 miles and then west for 240 miles before returning to its original position. At what time will it return to its original position? So now what are you thinking, right? What is it that you really have to pay attention to?
What time would it return?
Right, so now you know that this is not necessarily about the side lengths. The real question is about how much time does it take to do this trip? So now you're reading again, like, so now if you're pulling out numbers, a helicopter is flying at 120 miles per hour. That's the time. It takes off at noon. That's another time because that's going to tell you the starting point of when you left, right? So even though noon is a word, it's relevant as a number, like 12 o'clock. Now these other numbers are the directions and the distance. So it's flying south 180 miles. It's flying west 240 miles. And then it's returning to its original position. So what did you pick out for number 16?
Is it 6 p.m.?
That's it. Bernie needs a virtual prize.
I got it.
Oh my God.
Applause.
Yes.
6 p.m. So did everybody get J?
Yes, I got J.
Perfect. Congratulations.
I got J now.
Yeah.
So now what is the approach to the problem? What did you have to do?
Well, the first thing I did was find the missing side,
Uh-huh.
which was 300 miles.
Mm-hmm.
I add them. Well, I add all the sides, and then divide it by 120. miles per hour.
That's perfect. That's a perfect explanation. So you've got the trip, right? So if you want to say you went south 180, you went west 240, what you're realizing is that there's a missing side. So when they say you go south and you go west and you return back to your original position, that's where you know that technically you did the right triangle. So the first step is, like Bernie said, find the missing side. And what is the missing side? Is it A, B, or C?
C.
Right, so now you're saying A squared plus B squared equals C squared. So you're gonna say 180 plus 240 squared equals C squared. So 180 squared,
It's 240. It's 300.
240 squared,
540.
and then C squared. So I have 90,000. A, you're taking the square root to just get C by itself. So now that you know that X is actually 300. So what you are saying is, what is the total trip, right? So because the question is about travel, you're saying the time of the trip is actually the perimeter of the triangle. So that's why Bernie's saying add up all of the side lengths, because you're really trying to find out the trail of what they traveled. So you're going to say 180 was first, 240 was second, 300 was last to get back to the original. So that was 720 miles that they traveled. And you have to have that number. And then what you're saying is, I'm really dividing that by how fast they were going per hour. So 720 miles divided by the 120 miles per hour is 6. Now this is important because they just happen to have left at noon. So the answer is also 6 p.m. But what if they left at 3 p.m.? Then the answer would be 9 p.m., right? So when you find your answer of 6 hours, that's how long the trip was. That's when you have to pay attention to it departs or it takes off at noon. So from noon, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 would be 6 o'clock. But if they had said something like it took off at 9 a.m. or it took off at 1 p.m., you're going to count the 6 hours from the time it takes off. So now this one is a coincidence. It took off at noon. It was 6 hours. So the answer is also 6 p.m. But you really are counting from the time that they took off. So questions about this one? This was another one. You're using kind of like 3 steps. Find the missing side length. How many miles was the return back? You have to find the 300. Then you have to add it up for the perimeter to get 720. That's step 2. Then you have to divide by the miles per hour to get 6 hours. That's step 3. And then step 4 is really counting from clock time, which just happens to also be 6 o'clock. And now, last but not least, number 17. So, what did you get for number 17?
Well, I get that.
B.
It is B. Great Great job. So this one, a right triangle has one leg that measures 8 inches and an area of 24 square inches. All the sides have whole number lengths. What is the length in inches of the longest side? So now this is telling you the area of a triangle. It's telling you it's a right triangle again. So in order to find the area, you're using area equals 1/2 the base times the height. So you only know one side of the right triangle, right? But you do know the area, which means you could get another side of the right triangle. So let me see if I can draw this one too. So you're thinking about this one. You're starting out with area. They're telling you that the area is 24. And then what you do know is that one of the legs is 8 inches. So you can say to yourself, you're just going to replace maybe the base with the 8. And now you're just back to doing the algebra again. So what's 1/2 of 8 is 4. So you really have a 4h equals 24. So 4 times, or you're going to end up doing division, but in your mind, you might already know 4 times 6 is 24. So 4 divided by 4 is going to give you the h. 24 divided by 4 is going to give you the 6. So now, because of the area, you do know 2 lengths of the triangle now. You know the one that they gave you was 8 inches, and you know the height is 6 inches now. So now you can say to yourself, if you know it's a right triangle, and it's asking you, what is the longest side? That means that you don't know C. So you're going to put 6 for your height, 8 for your other measurement that they already gave you. And you might not even need the drawing. So either way, if you just want to use the formula, a squared plus b squared equals c squared, you still know they're asking you about the c squared. So that's the one that you're going to leave in the problem. When they say, what is the longest side? That means you're solving for that thing. So that's going to stay the letter. But you're going to say, I have a 6 squared and an 8 squared. So you're just saying 6 times 6 and 8 times 8. And even this one, we already know we're looking for the complementary numbers. So you're already saying 6, the 6 and the 4, right, equal 10. The 3 and the 6 equal 9. So you know this one is 100. And this is one, again, where you probably don't need the calculator. So in your own mind, you're thinking, what times what is 100? So the square root is 10. So when you get that C equals 10, that is the answer again, because that is the question of what was the longest side. When you use the Pythagorean theorem and say C equals 10, then you found the answer to the question that they were asking you. Now, I'm kind of surprised that 6 is not on the list, but I don't know. I didn't look at the other answers, like why there's an 8 or a 12. I mean, maybe they're just saying 8 is in the problem already. And let's see, probably 16 is just the 24 minus 8. That could be one way that somebody could come up with a 16. So when you're looking at the other answers that are there, it could be the random operations again. So what you have to do is say that you really know what you're looking for and how to get it by the information that they gave you. So on that note, how's everybody feeling about square and triangle? A little. So now we're coming to the end, right? So this section, number 18, 19, all the way through 25, is the trapezoid and the parallelogram. And those are kind of ones, we didn't spend a lot of time on them. We just did the math is fun. So as you look at these, you're gonna be combining some of the other things too. So let me just pull that up real quick. This is what it's gonna be for tomorrow. And then we'll also do this same textbook for the circle. So like looking at parallelograms and trapezoids, it says a parallelogram has 2 sets of opposite parallel sides, while a trapezoid has 1 set of opposite parallel sides. So this is, again, you draw out the parallelogram, draw the trapezoid. If you have to go back to math is fun, you can do that. Or if you want to go back to Aztec or Khan Academy, but when you read those words, you want to make sure you picture the right shape. So in something like number 18, it's saying consider again.
Area.
So it says, what is the area in square feet of the crosswalk? So when you're thinking of, I'm looking at a parallelogram, I need to do base times the height for area. But do I know the height of this parallelogram? No, right? The dashed line is the height.
Ah, okay.
So the 25 is not the height. That's a side length. And this is something that you just have to be careful about.
We're looking for the crossing. Okay.
Right. So now how would you find the diagonal, or how would you find the dashed line?
Pythagorean theorem.
Yep, you're going to use the Pythagorean theorem. So even though this is not in the triangle section anymore, what you're looking at is to do the parallelogram. If I cut a dashed line from one corner on the left to the corner on the right, I just created 2 triangles. So now I can get the height by looking at the height of the parallelogram as the base of a triangle. So 7, this is where now the triangle is not on its base. Right? So the C length is 25 now, the A length is 7, and I'm going to use the Pythagorean theorem to get B. Once I get that answer, it's a B or it's a H, whichever way you want to write it. If you're going to say it's H, then that's fine, because what your real goal is to find the area where you need the base is 7 and the height is coming from whatever you find in the Pythagorean theorem. So as you're going through these, you might have to use other information, right? So that's a trapezoid, then you have another parallelogram. So it's going back and forth. This one's saying, what is X? What is the area of the polygon? So do the considering, make sure you're focused on what they're asking you, like is it area, is it perimeter? What do I actually need? Even this one, like number 19, a flower bed is laid out or is to be laid out in the shape of a trapezoid. You might want to draw that one just to get something to visualize. And then you're going to need the 2 formulas. So you're going to need the area formula for trapezoid and the area formula for parallelogram. So again, you're just trying this out for tomorrow. This is another 8 questions. So I'm saying maybe like 15, 20 minutes is it. So you can do the 15, 20 minutes right before the class tomorrow, or if you still have time today, because this was a little bit of a longer class, you can still do it today if you want. But what we're going to go over is questions 18 through 25 tomorrow and answering any questions. And then I'm going to upload the same, actually it's just going to be 7.2 is what I'm going to upload for circle. So that's going to be area and circumference. So this is what you're using as kind of like a quiz. Do you remember everything from Math is Fun, Khan Academy, Aztec? Are you remembering all the formulas? So any questions? All right, so finish this document for tomorrow, and then tomorrow, maybe today, I'll throw the other one up. That will be Friday, and we'll probably take 2 days again. It might be like a section of circumference and a section of area, because the whole thing is circle, but it's another like 20 problems. So it's probably gonna take us Friday and Monday, maybe Tuesday. But then after that, we're gonna move on to the combination shapes and then the 3D. So thanks for coming to this class. Hope
Thank you
have a
very
great
much,
day.
Ms. Adela.
Good morning. Enjoy the rest of the day.
You too. I'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.